Hello and welcome to The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's opponents announced that they have reached a deal to form a new governing coalition, paving the way for the ouster of longtime Israeli leader. The agreement still needs to be voted on in the Knesset, but under the coalition agreement, Bennett and Lapid would rotate the role of Prime Minister. How did both of them overcome their differences to put this new movement in running order? A ransomware attack on JBS, the world's largest meatpacker by a group likely based in Russia, has strengthened the Biden administration's resolve to hold Moscow responsible for costly cyber assaults, even if they are not directly linked to the Kremlin. US President Joe Biden has launched a review of the threat posed by ransomware attacks. He will discuss the issue of harboring such hackers with Russian President Vladimir Putin this month. How will this latest attack affect the already strained relations between Russia and the United States? And Sri Lankan authorities are preparing for an oil spill from a sunken container ship after efforts to tow the vessel into deeper waters failed. Now a bigger ecological disaster is waiting to happen. What have authorities done so far to minimize the potentially devastating problems? So these are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. Far-right party leader Naftali Bennett threw his crucial support behind a unity government in Israel to unseat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, bringing the Netanyahu political era to an end. But who is Naftali Bennett? Our infographic explains. On Thursday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu fought back against an agreement by his political opponents for a government of left-wing, centrist and right-wing parties aimed at unseating him.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's longest-serving prime minister, is on the verge of being toppled from power after more than a decade in office. From ultra-nationalists to Arab Israelis, the right-winger is set to be ousted by an extremely fragile and unlikely alliance of parties from across the political spectrum who have little in common other than their desire to break a political deadlock that saw 4 elections in 2 years. The coalition all hinges on an unlikely figure, Mansour Abbas, head of the United Arab List. The inclusion of his tiny faction was crucial in securing a paper-thin majority for the coalition, which would be the first in Israel's history to represent its 21% Arab minority. A dentist by profession, Abbas said he has put differences aside for a chance to improve conditions for Arab citizens who report discrimination and government neglect. His inclusion stands in stark contrast to head of the New Guard, Naftali Bennett, leader of the ultra-nationalist party Yamina.
So we'll get once and for all a government who actually cares for the people.
Bennett is a former leader of a major Jewish settlement organization and an advocate of annexing most of the occupied West Bank. His religious pro-settler party won only 7 of the Knesset's 120 seats in the March election, but Bennett emerged first as kingmaker, then kingslayer, and now king. Under the deal, the former defense minister and a high-tech millionaire would become prime minister before handing over the post in 2 years to centrist Yair Lapid. Lapid is a former TV host and finance minister who heads up Yesh Atid.
Shalom lachem.
The center-left party came second in the latest election with 17 seats. Sources say the hopeful government would initially avoid hot-button ideological issues. Parliamentary approval is still pending, and analysts say Netanyahu will try and pick off, quote, low-hanging fruit, trying to convince right-wingers to jump ship who are unhappy about teaming up with Arab and leftist lawmakers.
I'm now joined live from Tel Aviv by Avital Leibovich, who's the director of the American Jewish Committee in Israel.
Hello.
Hello, Avital. Thank you for joining us here today on The Edge. Now, it went right up to the final moments last night before the coalition was announced, before the midnight deadline. Very tense moment, I'm sure, in Israel. What can you tell us about how this coalition finally came together, and what your expectations are in the coming days? Because I believe it's not yet over, is it?
No, it's not yet over. I think more than anything, this coalition demonstrated the fact that Israel is a very, very vibrant democracy, because bridging differences of ideologies between 8 different parties is something which is very, very challenging. As you know, in this possible future coalition, there are parties who are on the left side of the political map, there are parties which are on the right side of the political map, and there are parties which are on the center of political map. So the negotiations, as you rightly mentioned, really went up to the last minute, few minutes of the mandate, before the mandate expired. Now, what to expect, we'll know in another 10 days or so. Because now the real work begins. The government needs to be sworn in. In other words, there needs to be 61 members of Knesset who will be sworn in as part of this unity government in the next 10 days. This will be challenging because this is right now the stage of the final summaries, the final considerations, the final priorities of each party. So it's going to be very, very challenging.
Now, we know it's a very, as you say, it's a very broad spectrum of political views there. And to bring that together was a tremendous achievement. Is there the risk that even at this late stage that it could fragment even before that process is seen all the way through, before the new government is installed under this coalition?
It could happen. It could happen if, let's say, some members of one of the parties will decide to leave the party and not be a part of this unity government. But I do want to focus on some positive issues, which is that for the first time in Israel's history, an Arab party chose to be a part of the government, because traditionally all the Arab parties since the 80s have refused to sit together with the Jewish government. And for the first time, Ram party, which is an Arab party, has agreed to be a part of this government. I think it will promote the Arab population in Israel in a very significant way.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because obviously that is a very important step forward. We've heard Yair Lapid say that he wants this to be a government for everyone in Israel. But at the same time, Naftali Bennett has very strong views, and others have very strong views about non-Jews in Israel, about the rights of Palestinians. So how is this all going to, is this going to show any change in the future, any easing of tensions? Is it going to create new opportunities?
Well, I'm not, of course, a prophet, but it can go one of two ways. Either the different parties will reach some sort of a consensus on policy issues regarding the Palestinians, regarding minorities in Israel, and then this government will be able to succeed and last for 4 years, or it could go the other way. What I understand, in order to prevent the collapse of this government, what I understand is that there will be freedom of voting to each and every party, which means that the parties will still be able to support their ideological issues. They will still be able to support the things they care about and the population they work for. So this may be some kind of a diplomatic solution for the situation, but I can tell you that this will not be simple to handle. Again, 8 parties from different edges of the political arena. It will definitely be challenging.
And there are so many different topics here, but of course one of the big ones is that one political era led by Netanyahu looks to be coming to an end. He's been in power now for 12 years as Prime Minister. Is it true what they're saying, that this is a coalition built to oust him? And why have they, if that is correct, why have they united under this anti-Netanyahu theme?
Well, they call themselves the camp of change. And the change they're speaking of is bringing a new change to the political system, to the country, which of course has also connection to the current prime minister. But look, regardless of Netanyahu or not Netanyahu, this country has been on a political stalemate for 2 years. Mm-hmm. One election after another, and basically the country was stuck politically. A budget was not passed for 3 years, and many processes were stuck. So there is a lot of eagerness and motivation to step out of this solution and move forward to some kind of a change, to see this kind of a change. And at the end of the day, let's remember in a humble way that no one was born prime minister. Netanyahu was not born prime minister. Lapid was not born prime minister. Neither was Bennett. And they will have to surround themselves with professionals, with experts, with assistants who will help them succeed in this position.
Well, of course, in that last 2 years, the one thing that we've seen that Israel has managed to pull off is its vaccination campaign for Israelis, very successfully done. But as you say, the rest of the governing needs have largely been stalled. And so it's interesting to hear Netanyahu railing against this new coalition, saying it's bad for the security of Israel. Surely not having a government in place and 4 elections creates tremendous insecurity for the country. So how do you see things stabilizing from here?
Well, you know, I want to put aside politicians' statements, because if there is one thing that Israel knows how to pull off, it's emergency situation, be it Corona or a rocket attack from Gaza. Israel knows how to work together to stand against these challenges and also prevail. And we've seen this last week with the operation in Gaza, with the Minister of Defense, which is in a different party from Netanyahu, worked together with Netanyahu to bring some very impressive results. We've seen that during the Corona years. You rightly said the Corona is no longer an issue in Israel for months already. All the restrictions have been moved already. So under emergency situation, the political lack of competitiveness, it's not really a factor.
Well, of course, the impressive results that you just mentioned, as you brought it up, include the death of 66 children in Gaza and 60 or 70 women, civilians in Gaza. This doesn't seem...
This is not the information that
particularly impressive.
I have to say, because, yeah, this is not the information I have. I know there are a lot of rumors, and I can turn you to a New York Times article, which was published yesterday, of a supposedly child who was on the list of the children that you are mentioning and turned to be a 20-year-old mujahideen fighter of Hamas. So according to the information that I have, there were approximately 220 terrorists who were killed in the recent operation. 25 of them actually were senior leaders. This is not something you will hear from us.
Obviously, there's going to be tremendous amount of investigation into that. The United Nations and others saying that war crimes were committed during that conflict by both sides, but particularly from the targeting of civilian buildings and medical centres in Gaza. So obviously your information sources have been rather selective. But looking at how this new coalition government can move forward, before the recent conflict between into Gaza, we had the eviction of Palestinians from Sheikh Jarrah and the attacks on worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. Will a government that's formed with such a broad coalition look towards the rights of everyone living in the territories?
So let's set the facts straight. First of all, there was no eviction of any houses. The Sheikh Jarrah 4 houses in a 200-meter-long street is still being dealt with in court.
That's still being dealt with, but there have been many. There have been many evictions from Palestinian territories, and there have been many settlements built. And the Director General of the United Nations, I'm sure, has correct facts. He, in his recent statement towards the end of the conflict, calling for a ceasefire from Israel, reiterated the illegal settlement operations going on in the West Bank and elsewhere.
I think you are mixing a few things together. The Sheikh Jarrah is still in court. The Palestinian families living there are welcome to bring documents explaining their relation to their homes, which, by the way, were Jordanian until 1967 and not Palestinian. As for Al-Aqsa Mosque, Al-Aqsa Mosque is a holy place. And the question I think we need to ask is how come there was a storage of rocks, of stones, of metal rods that were hidden by Palestinian worshippers on the mosque itself in order to use against Jews who were praying.
The worshippers were in the mosque worshipping at the end of the Ramadan holy month. What is in the mosque is any large building has different things inside of it, but
no holy place. No mosque has, and no synagogue and no church has such amount of rocks and stones inside.
Obviously not been in any large buildings and seen things that are around there. Avatar Leibovich, thank you so much for joining us today here on The Edge. Thank you. Our reaction to the agreement has been mixed of the coalition. While some are just relieved at the prospect of an end to the political turmoil, which has seen Israel hold 4 elections in just 2 years. Others are saying that the country will continue to be in political turmoil. We'll see what these developments will bring. But for now, let's move to another strained political situation, namely the relationship between Russia and the United States. And the United States and Russia have a long history of confrontation. Our following infographic has more about this relationship. JBS, the world's largest meat supplier, says that the vast majority of the company's food plants are now operational after a ransomware attack by a Russia-linked hacking group disrupted meat production in North America and Australia.
JBS employees returned to U.S. meat plants on Wednesday, a day after the company's beef operations ground to a halt due to a ransomware attack believed to be perpetrated by a notorious hacking group based in Russia. At the end of remarks related to his administration's vaccination efforts, President Joe Biden was asked if he planned to retaliate against Russia for the second supply chain disrupting attack in less than a month.
Mr. President, will you retaliate against Russia for this latest ransomware attack?
We're looking closely at that issue.
Do you think Putin is testing you?
No.
Earlier, White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki said she expected Biden to discuss the spate of ransomware attacks with Russian President Vladimir Putin at their summit in Geneva on June 16th.
President Biden certainly thinks that President Putin and the Russian government has a role to play in stopping and preventing these attacks. Responsible states do not harbor ransomware criminals.
A source with direct knowledge of the latest ransomware attack told Reuters on Wednesday that the Russian cyber gang responsible goes by the name REvil, which attacked Apple supplier Quanta Computer earlier this year, demanding a ransom of $50 million for the company to regain access to its systems. The ransomware attack on JBS, the world's largest meat producer, also follows one in May by another group with ties to Russia against Colonial Pipeline, the largest fuel pipeline in the United States, which said it paid $4.4 million ransom to the hackers. Officials said JBS plants were expected to return to full capacity in the next couple of days, and the company said in a statement on Tuesday night that it had made, quote, significant progress in resolving the cyber attack.
I'm now joined live from Florida by political analyst Bülent Yavuz. Bülent, thank you for joining us today on The Edge. So, America likes its meat, but a ransomware attack has ground things to a halt for a few days. How is a cyber attack able to affect an industry such as meat processing?
I think the cyber attack practice, especially performed by companies and entities linked to Russia, have become a part of the mainstream landscape in the United States. It is becoming a chronic issue. Reports indicate that there are at least 40 firms, 40 outlets, a majority of them are from Russia, have been quite successful in doing what they call ransomware. And basically it's destruction of the data or handling the data, and in return asking for ransom to give it back or to pass the information to third parties. This has become industry practice by these, let's say, runaway companies who are very skilled in technology. So they are not linked directly to the state in Russia. So they're not part of the Russian Federation, and there's very little evidence that Russia is ordered to do these attacks. However, there's no question that these sort of companies, these sort of outlets have been harbored and guarded by Putin's Russia. So that's the prevalent understanding in the United States. And obviously, it's going to be a part of the agenda in, I believe, in June the 16th, when the two presidents are going to come together to discuss various issues after the NATO summit.
I think it was White House Press Secretary, wasn't it, Patsky, saying yesterday that Biden thinks that although it probably wasn't a state-sponsored attack, Russia still, as the government, has a role to play in making sure that criminal activities like this aren't able to happen. So that's a perspective they're probably going to take.
Exactly. What the United States is going to ask from Russia is to go after these entities and put them in court and give them the punishment that they deserve. And the U.S. is going to follow up with what the Russian government will handle, how the Russian government will handle these situations. So it is one of the critical issues between the two countries, and there are a few others, of course, that there is a pretty good sizable list between, at least on the U.S. side, to ask improvement from Russian government. So we don't know how these conversations, how this discussion is going to be proceed. However, we know that in Russia, President Putin's popularity, although it's high, it's not as high as it used to be because of primarily because of the wealth within the public is not as good as it was 5 years ago, primarily by the many of the sanctions, and also the oil prices didn't help for the public. In return, Russians supported the annexation of Crimea back in the day when it happened, which caused the many of these sanctions to trigger. The nationalistic element within the country supported that. But that support seems to be winding down quite a bit because at the end of the day, as someone in Russia said, that there is a disagreement between the TV set and the refrigerator in Russia. So that's kind of like summarizes the situation, that people are looking at their own welfare and how hard it's becoming to maintain a good life versus the good news that they hear on from the media on various areas of success by Russia.
Indeed. Now, of course, as you mentioned, the sanctions are continuing against the ongoing actions in Crimea, and also following the SolarWinds cyber attack, and also possibly over Navalny and his treatment, I imagine. The conversation this month, when they meet when Biden and Putin meet on the 16th of June, is likely to be very different from the last time the presidents of the two countries met. Of course, last time it was with Donald Trump. How do you think, what's being put out in America about how the relationship will change between the presidents of the United States and the president of Russia?
Well, there is a prelude to all this thing, and that is how the NATO members and how the European Union members and also UK would come around and support the U.S. policies. So that's a key part of the answer to your question, because President Biden does not want to act alone in a unilateral way in his stance against Russia, unless he sees it there's no other way. But there's quite a bit of effort and collaboration within the Western governments right now, and President Biden is going to take the NATO summits, to his full advantage, and would request a unified standing against Russia in the coming years. Mm-hmm. So with that, I think what the United States would like to see that the relationship between the two countries improve, and there is no reason in many areas to raise the bar and increase the level of conflict. In essence, actually, there are areas which require that both countries come on the table and work together, such as the environmental issues, and as well as a few other places in the world, including the Middle East and the Eastern Mediterranean, if it's all possible. Mm-hmm. But what Russia has been trying to do, that it appears to be, is like they really kind of push the envelope to increase the tension between Russia and the U.S., but they're very careful not to overdo it. It's like having a Goldilocks diplomacy conflict, a little bit on the warmer side of the porridge, mm-hmm. but not too much. So President Putin is very skilled in maintaining that level of tension to keep the public with him, and show that the Russia's good days are here to come, and show the people that the great Russia is on its way to come back in the future as a major power, much bigger than what it is today. So that image is very, very important for him. And he needs to be very convincing to his constituency, but yet at the same time, definitely wants to avoid a really heated confrontation with the United States or countries in the West.
Yeah, that's important for everyone. And with your analogy with Goldilocks, I should warn you there are 3 bears in that story, but no eagles. There's been a lot of posturing over the last days and weeks with Russians on the Ukrainian border, and in the last few days, a huge flyover from NATO planes. Both the Russians and America and its allies on different sides posturing to show their strength. This is something which we might expect. It's something which has gone on for decades. Of course, what's important is what happens around the diplomatic tables. Now, as you mentioned, Joe Biden will first of all be meeting with NATO members and the G7 before he meets with Putin. So I imagine that the conversation will be worked out in the coming weeks, exactly how things will go in with the Biden-Putin meeting.
Yes, it is. President Biden is getting, let's say, more comfortable in his seat since he took over the office on January the 20th. Yet at the same time, there has been at the background a boiling opposition from the former President Donald Trump and his supporters in the Republican Party. So there is another element to talk about, which is the internal politics. So long that he maintains his convincing arguments within the country that he is doing good for the people in the United States, in economy, and it continues to do well in the fight against COVID, and then following up on the infrastructure bill and creating new jobs, etc. These are all elements of this equation. In other words, the internal politics. As long as he feels stronger within the country, he will translate his strength into the foreign diplomacy. And I say that because when he said America is back, Europeans applauded him, but with caution, because they know, everyone knows that there is this big opposition in the United States, that the country is not necessarily completely unified. Or, you know, if President Biden's policies and Democrats could be overturned starting in the midterm elections in 2022. So Europe is very careful monitoring these. If a European country is going to take a firmer stance than what they have against Russia, I'm sure they wanted to make sure that U.S. is here for real and in a sustainable way. So this is very, very important.
I imagine all eyes will be on how Biden performs during his travels after the last visit this side of the Atlantic from Donald Trump, where he upstaged the Queen of England, upsets the NATO leaders and European leaders. Are the expectations that this tour of Biden's will normalize relations? And what does your polling say about how international relations, particularly with Europe, are developing?
Well, I mean, in general, ever since President Biden took office, that normalization has started at great speed, and almost in every country, in every major country in Europe, at least. That's pretty clear. And notwithstanding what I just said earlier, that there's a doubt within Europe if whether it's going to be sustainable or not. I think the Western Bloc would like to see a sustainable position where everyone is looking a lead by the United States going forward in NATO, as well as in the advance on climate change and economy as well. But that doesn't mean that, of course, the European countries going to need and require absolutely the leadership of the United States. Europe on its own is a great power to reckon with. But, you know, of course, without the United States, if the Western Bloc looks confused and tentative, then it will, you know, it's going to be a beneficial for President Putin and his philosophy. So this is very, very critical, and so far so good, I would say. The relations and the way that President Biden is perceived in the United States, with the exception of his policies on the immigration front down in the southern border, he scored quite well in all major areas, but more needs to come. Because, you know, once COVID is, COVID is on its way out, it looks, at least from the perception of the people. Yes, he's successful, but very soon, it's not going to be too long before people forget about COVID, and they're going to look at the more real and more, I would say, more sustainable chronic problems such as healthcare, economy, jobs, etc. People are not looking at the environmental issue as a key concern, but President Biden knows that it is it's essential to be successful in that, to have a future in the world. But it is very difficult to sell to public that it is the most urgent issue at hand as humanity. Indeed. So he has to really manage that problem without really disturbing the apple cart in the economy. To create jobs, and he's merging jobs and technology and the fight against climate change all in one unison pot. So
and on top of all this, he needs to make his travels. Well, I'm sure that Russian President Vladimir Putin is also looking forward to the meeting, so that the relations can strengthen between the two countries, as at the end of the day, as you mentioned, the economy is being struck by the sanctions. If they can be, the problems there can be lifted, and following this recent ransomware attack doesn't make things any worse, that can only be good for Putin. But Aljazzar, thank you for joining us today on The Edge and giving us your analysis of the situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Andy.
The White House plans to use a summit between Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin to deliver a clear message to the Russian leader, as consensus grows among Western allies that stronger action is needed against such attacks. The summit on the 16th of June will show if possible solutions can be found against such attacks from groups based in Russia. For now, let's move on to our final topic from Sri Lanka, where a sunk cargo ship could cause an environmental disaster. Climate change and environmental disasters are global problems, and the whole world suffers from their impacts. This infographic explains what you need to know. The ship's owners confirmed that the crew had been aware of a leak, but they said that they were denied permission by both Qatar and India to dock the ship in either country. There's growing anger in Sri Lanka that the ship was allowed to enter the country's waters after being rejected by the other two nations. Meanwhile, a court order is currently preventing the captain, chief engineer and additional engineer from leaving the country. We all hope that whatever happens, an environmental disaster can be prevented in the region. Now, our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of their statements. Before closing our programme, let's have a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top stories with Miriam Carson. Miriam.
Thank you, that's right. And we are still going to Sri Lanka to take a look at today's social media reactions with a comment on hashtag #ExpressPearl. Let's have a look. And the first comment today comes from Sam Chambers, who's saying the charred remains of the #ExpressPearl without hundreds of tons of bunker fuel on board are sitting on the seabed at the depths of just 21 meters. And it's way close to Sri Lanka's western coastline. Let's move on and see what Splainer is saying. As a result, the beaches along the coast are now coated with nurdles, small pellets used to manufacture plastic. ExpressPearls will carrying 78 metric tons of nurdles, many of which were fell overboard, and thanks to choppy seas during monsoon, they are being distributed far and wide. And moving on, Analua Pereira is saying, maritime environmental protection is a topic we often talk about, would never implement. From the Express Pearl to the release of Fukushima nuclear wastewater, all these indicate that human behavior causes irreparable damage to the ocean. Let's take a look at our video of the day regarding promotes action against climate emergency and appeals to everyone to make a difference.
If we look at the world's history, we are but a snap of the fingers. Yet we have altered the planet.
Now is the time for our regeneration.
Restoring what we have damaged may be our only way out to solve the crisis we are going through.
This World Environment Day, restoration starts at home. Join us and be a part of Generation Restoration.
Restoration starts now.
Like
I reimagine a regreened future.
And I turn trash into cash.
What is your pledge?
To kickstart action for a better world.
You can be a part of it.
Join us today.
Become a part of Generation Restoration and show us what you will restore.
And this is all for me. Back to Andy.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy Boyns. Stay tuned as we'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.